we are effectively prevented from having reasonable choices so early in the process that we are forced to choose between unreasonable choices, all of which are effectively acceptable to the elites that haunt our system. And we would be wise to break out of that dynamic.
Recently, Bret Weinstein was on the Dad Saves America podcast exposing the sick and twisted incentive structure of America's elite class, why they get away with so many evils, and why the American people are forced into a corner to choose between them, different flavors of those evils. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Do you have a theory or do you have a model of the elite, or that maybe even is evolutionary in nature? Like, how do you think about is there a unifying theory of elite behavior? You know, Rob Henderson, who's been on the show, talks about luxury beliefs. That seems like one aspect of this. That's some outgrowth of it. How do you think about it?
Well, let's leave open the question of whether we know who the elites are. Right? We could certainly name some people who are likely candidates, but let's just leave open the possibility that the elites is a real thing, but that our guess as to who's in and who's out is liable to be rough at best. I think you can say the following thing. The idea of a free civilization in which people are liberated to do a great variety of things, and where you, in general, are rewarded for figuring out how to create wealth. And the more wealth you create, from which we all benefit, the better you do. I'm not saying that the system will never work perfectly that way, but a system that roughly worked that way is more or less what we think we have or are supposed to have.
It's better than plunder. It's better than piracy.
Oh, I think it's marvelous. I am an unashamed defender of the idea of the West, which is not a list of countries. It's a belief that we should level the playing field, liberate people as meaningfully as we can. Everybody should play their cards as effectively as they can, and we should expect and, in fact, desire people to be differentially rewarded based on how successful they are at creating wealth from which we all benefit. I think you're not going to beat that system.
Yeah, I generally agree with that too. He actually threw me off there when he said leveling the playing field, because what does that mean? Does that mean politically, economically, trying to ensure, equality of outcomes? But then he corrects my general suspicion there by saying no, in accordance to what you produce there, and I agree. Look, elites are inevitable. Every society is going to have them. It's just a matter of how good or virtuous those elites are, and there is a spectrum of relativity. You wouldn't know this from living in America today, but I would say, throw up the founding fathers, that elite class compared to our own, and that was a much more virtuous people overall. Cicero, Voltaire, people like that were elites in their own time and place, were much more amenable to individual rights and to rooting out corruption, generally speaking, and actually critiquing other parts of the elite class. Cicero famously did that to Mark Antony and to Caesar. Voltaire did that to the Bourbon monarchs, etc. That is what we don't have now because of our corrupt elite class that has this incentive structure to get where they are through manipulation rather than being virtuous.
However, you can imagine that for people who have, by whatever means, through crime or through the production of wealth and doing well by doing good, once you've attained another level, right, a level above what almost anybody ever achieves, you have a lot to lose. Mm-hmm. And the idea that you might therefore view with some concern all of the various contenders to join and ultimately displace. In other words, there should be some churn amongst the people at the very top based on the fact that the people at the very top may play their cards badly and disappear from that strata, and other people will play their cards well and they will join. And so if you're in that strata, the question might be, well, what can I do to make sure that I'm always here? Right?
Yeah, that's exactly what they do. Manipulate and vie through coercive means, coercive measures, seizures of property to try to build their own, standing in society legally and in the political system. You're seeing this right now in Israel with Netanyahu, who essentially tries to bomb as many of his Arabian neighbors as possible, get into as many wars as possible, and enact a genocide in Gaza as long as possible to keep himself in standing in the presidency, because you know what would happen if he didn't? He'd go down for corruption and fraud charges, which he was going to be before October 7th. Those charges were on the table. It was a big political corruption scandal in Israel at the time, but he's prolonged his tenure, and even though those charges are still on the table now, they keep getting delayed, and he's never facing justice. This is just one example. But I don't know if there needs to be displacement among the elite class just as an obligatory process. If, there are elites that are well-minded, well-intentioned, and get there not because of their manipulative tactics, but because they serve others. People in a just company that doesn't grovel to the state for special privileges and trade rights that you and I wouldn't get, or certain subsidies. If it's actually people that get to the positions they are by serving the public, by people, giving them their money hand over fist because they want the product they offer, instead of how many of our corrupt political and corporate class people get to their power, I don't think those people should be displaced. But that is a big difference, and we're not living in the world where those people generally are moral and virtuous.
And you might imagine that collusion would emerge between them. And they would say, well, you have the same concern because it's natural. We've attained something. We'd like not to lose it. So what can we do? And yeah, there are some, you can be smart and you can play your cards well, and that can stave off your dropping out of that strata for some period. But ultimately, it will dawn on a great many of them that cheating, such that those who are attempting to displace them have a harder time than they might otherwise, would be a reasonable thing. So what I'm effectively arguing is that we little people should, if we're wise, should want the system that matches the brochure of our civilization, right? A level playing field where everybody has an opportunity, everybody has access to the market, you play your cards as well as you can, and you're rewarded for making the world better in some way.
Yeah, equality under the law, I can buy that. I can't buy into equal playing field when it comes to economic outcomes. And I know that's what some people might take from this. I know that's not what Bret means. But I don't know that Bret is a little person. I think he's a multi-billionaire, by the way. So, I mean, to say that if you're Bret Weinstein is a little bit, off-putting in a way. And I like Bret. I like most of what he has to say. But I wouldn't say that you could self-describe as a little person if you're Bret Weinstein.
And then we've got a bunch of people who will naturally wish to conspire against that because built into that description that I've just given is a threat to their position. And I wonder, that is really an evolutionary explanation, that a system in which everyone is free to join the elites is one in which the elites will take on a perspective in which they wish to limit the scope of that system so that they are not threatened by it.
Yeah, elite gatekeeping, that's what this is, right? And to get into elite society, you have to parrot a large amount of propaganda. It seems to be the case anyways. You had to be full-bore supportive of the COVID regime, supportive of the forever wars, supportive of endless debt, all the corporate subsidies, the inflation apparatus, and the resulting from the central bank and the Fed, the money printing press. That is the elite class. It's to build what Tom Woods calls the 3x5 index card of allowable opinion and stay within those confines. There can be some debates within those narrow confines, but if you veer too far from that, you risk not being part of the elite class. Even, Elon Musk daring to hold Republicans accountable in the Oval Office for Doge, despite the fact that they were pushing the big abominable bill to add $5 trillion to the debt. That was enough to have the elite class turn against another member of the elite class by saying, hey, this is a serious concern, and you're ignoring it.
There's, I haven't read deeply into the work here, but I know there's been some interesting writing on that one of a potentially powerful force in human history has been kind of what you're describing, which is to say fighting amongst elites, essentially to protect turf, and that people who are in a good position want to make sure that the people who are immediately at their heels can't get that next way up. And then the fallout from the rest of that effort is that a lot more people than just the immediate competitors get harmed by that, but that actually the driving force is I've reached this status point, this wealth status, how I see myself, the circles I'm in. And I don't want you, who are right there 2 years behind me, to take my spot. I've seen this in corporate life, especially. I worked at Viacom, it's now called Paramount, but sort of big media corporation. There's a very small number of the top spots to become a VP, SVP, etc. And the kind of warfare that goes on inside of that hierarchy is brutal. It can be brutal, and so that sounds a little bit like the kind of dynamic you're describing. Is that how you understand it? Is that another way to look at it?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And you can imagine in a corporate context, it means that you might expect the head of a division to hire the most promising people, and you might be surprised that that's not what happens, because of course the most promising people are in a position to outshine you. And so anyway, you would imagine that those institutions have a built-in obstacle to refining themselves, in that there are perverse incentives for those who inhabit them. But of course, our democratic republic isn't supposed to work like that at all, right? We're supposed to effectively be the hiring authority.
Yeah, we are, and Americans haven't done a great job, but it's not all their fault. It is because the people that create the structure by which there is that hiring authority is corrupt to the core. You saw this play out in major political parties, even in the last few decades. You had a war between Ron Paul and Mitt Romney in the Republican Party, with Republicans doing everything they could to change the rules and make it so Ron Paul's delegates didn't have as much power, and Mitt Romney was going to be the nominee. You saw this in the Democratic Party, the proverbial war between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, in which Bernie Sanders, who had more populist-leaning ideas at the time, was pushed way to the wayside in favor of the liberal establishment. Mitt Romney representing the conservative establishment. That's what you have. This carefully orchestrated concept and project to elevate the worst villains among us that want more corporate welfare, more wars, more surveillance state, more perversions of the First Amendment, more privacy violations, more inflation, more debt spending elevated to the top. And that's what we're set up with. It's the elite class that is effectively covering for its own, even if they're ostensibly on the different side of the aisle. That's what we see.
Who puts people into a position, and if they don't do our bidding in office, we're supposed to throw them out. Of course, the way the game evolves in the case of our democratic republic, we are effectively prevented from having reasonable choices so early in the process that we are forced to choose between unreasonable choices, all of which are effectively acceptable to the elites that haunt our system. And we would be wise to break out of that dynamic.
Yeah, I totally agree with him on that last point. That is so true. We're prevented from reasonable choices by unreasonable people that rule over us and limit those choices in such a way. Noam Chomsky, the famous anarcho-syndicalist, dissident left-winger and hater of U.S. foreign policy, who I've learned quite a bit from, actually, and I'm a right-wing libertarian, but he said the easiest way to keep people obedient is to narrow the spectrum of allowable opinion, but allow vigorous and lively debate within that spectrum. That's exactly what you see from U.S. politics. That's why it always seems to be such a circus. Why optically it seems like a war playing out between divergent forces on the left and the right, when it really is the same elite class, and no matter who you pick between those two, the tax rates, marginal rates, might be different by 1 or 2% per bracket. We're still going to have record level spending, a new amount of forever wars shoved down the throats of Americans, continual corporate welfare, the expansion of the surveillance state, pork spending, all of this nonsense, no matter who you elect. No matter who you elect, you always get John McCain. That's what my good friend Tom Woods said. And I think there's a lot of truth to it. Our choices are narrowed down by the elite class, who have a twisted incentive structure to get to positions in power where they are, not through making people happy, not through serving the common man, not through appealing to virtue or individual rights and liberty, but through manipulation and coercion, and seeing how far you can drive this power driven structure forward in an age where, hey, the U.S. president has more power now than the strongest and most powerful monarch of the 18th century, the time in which Americans revolted from the British crown. And I think that's just undeniable. But it's not just the president, it's the deep state apparatus around the president, which isn't even elected. So you have power structures and people getting into prominent positions that aren't even total power holders over the deep state. We saw how powerful the deep state was, during Russiagate in Trump's first term, when they essentially framed the sitting president for treason and bogged him down in this farcical propaganda scheme just to exacerbate tensions with Russia and undermine the sitting president. But that's what you get from our elite class. Trump's now part of it. He's Israel first, military industrial complex first, JP Morgan first to the core. We have the same policies despite all the rhetoric that was so different stylistically and different from approach, but that's what we have now. I do want to hear from you down below. Let me know in the comments, what do you think are the most twisted aspects of the elites' power structure and the elites' incentive structure to convince them to do the things they do? Do Americans have real choices? And is Bret Weinstein correct? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Dad Saves America. His show is awesome. I really appreciate it. This podcast needs to have more eyes on it. And I'm biased because I like John a lot. I met him recently and he's fantastic. But please subscribe to his podcast too. Also, please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button down below, you can help support my channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.